Welcome to the LowCarbMD podcast. No one is beyond help. No one is beyond hope.
As we have always said, we are bringing you medical information and cutting-edge science, but none of this is medical advice. Please seek out input from your own doctor.
Hello and welcome back to the LowCarbMD podcast. Hey, Tro, man, good to be back with you. It's been a little while.
Yeah, no, this is going to be great, man. I miss you. You're out killing it on your podcast. You had all my favorite, role models. Of course, you've had the good Dorian Greenow. Already you've had him. So we're getting second dibs here, but we're so happy to have him here today.
Well, I actually had the brains of the operation. We had Gemma on too. Don't forget that.
That's right. Yeah. Well, we got to get her on too one day. I've interacted with her quite a bit for the last couple of years, and just. Can I say one thing? I'm not, I have no industry sponsorship, none of it, 0%, right? And we use Keto Mojo exclusively in our clinic. We use it in our patients, okay, to remotely track their ketone meters. And Keto Mojo was the first company to actively work with us to integrate into our EMR so we could provide seemingly, asynchronous real-time care to patients. And I just want to say thank you.
You're most welcome. I mean, we realized very early on that real-time care was going to be the most important thing that could affect metabolic change, not only here in America, but globally. If you look at the traditional episodic method of care, I mean, Brian, you remember the days where the patient would roll through the door, you'd do your intake, you'd have your X number of minutes with the patient and take a pill and then come back and see me in 60 days. And that was kind of like the standard, wasn't it? And then it was 60 days, 3 months, and 6 months. And, it's very interesting. I was just in Europe at the Keto Live conference and the public health collaborative that was held in Bristol. So we went from Bristol to Switzerland, and Dr. Unwin was presenting, and he presented what I call the shark's teeth diagram, where he would have a meeting and then the person would get on keto, and then they would fall off the wagon, and they'd see the numbers change, and then they'd come back onto the wagon, and then they'd fall off again, and then come back on. And this had like teeth that were coming out there. Well, how do you cut the teeth off there? You only do that by a continuous remote care model. And the challenge for us was integrating with the systems that you use. I mean, yes, we could come up with our own system independently, and that's relatively easy. But we have to work where all the doctors are working, all the clinicians are working. And America is a patchwork quilt of 60 different electronic health record systems. It's crazy. And so you have to try and work with all of these different systems. And when we have a doctor like yourself, who's like going, I want to integrate, and you worked with us. And that was the cool thing. You worked with us, you worked with your system, which was, I think, was it Elation, if I remember correctly, with Elation. So we could build a tunnel from both ends and make that connection. So you could have that real-time data. And when you have real-time data, you can affect change. You can get that moment where they're like, you can see when somebody's struggling, and you go like, send them like a Calendly link and say, have a link with one of our coaches. We're noticing you're struggling, and we want to work through what's going on. And half the time, it could be something else in that person's life. It could be that, their kid's not doing well at school, or that they've had a death in the family and they've gone back to emotional eating, or other things. And it's the other things that we need to address to be really good at affecting metabolic change.
Oh yeah, that's a key. I mean, Tro and I are just, we're totally on board, because that's what happens. And even with me and Tro, I know you hear the same thing. I'll have someone, they'll be doing something, and then they knock their continuous glucose meter off. And I'm like, what did you do after it came off? I guess, I ate cookies and donuts that day, because I knew you couldn't see it, right? I knew you couldn't see it. So there's some people who have that accountability. Then I have other people who go, I don't want to see it. I don't want to see my sugar go to 250. It stresses me out. And the same thing goes with ketones. If they can look at their ketones and go, am I on track? Am I off track? And they can monitor that. If they, especially, I think if you're on a carnivore diet, checking your ketones every 4 hours probably not beneficial to you. But if you say, hey, I went off the wagon, I went over to my sister-in-law's house, how far, because people always ask me, like, if I blow it on the weekends, how long does it take me to get back into ketosis, right? And you go, well, there's one way to really tell for sure, and using and we exclusively use Keto Mojo. We have no financial involvement, but I think it's important that say, hey, this is the cheapest thing for our patients, the best tool, and we want to use every tool at our that we have at our that we can expose our patients to, and especially if we can save some money doing it. I think
it's a map and compass model. When you go into somewhere new, say you're at the roadmap is the roadmap of foods. Say, for instance, we're traveling through Italy. And what are the foods that we're going to have in Italy? Well, this is the compass that guides you. It will guide you to say, yes, you can have some of those wonderful Mediterranean cuisines, but maybe not have those pastas. And once you start to learn the route, if you're especially in somewhere new, when you go to work every day, do you need a map and compass or a GPS? No, you don't. Once you've learned the food map, the food route that is correct for you as an individual, the need to test diminishes. And I think this is the key goal. I know like a lot of people like CGMs, and I look at my CGM when I put it on and it's boring. I flatline because I'm always in ketosis. I always know the route. I know how to easily walk that without having so many deviations and going off course. So for me, a CGM is a very boring piece of individual. Ketones is compliance. If you are in a state of ketosis, you will have good glucose control, period. And I think that's the beautiful tool for not only clinicians, but also for the actual user and the patient themselves. And then obviously, as we come back and look at this, the question is, do ketones matter? And that might be, the number of ketones might be different for somebody with multiple sclerosis or mental health or epilepsy than it will be for somebody who's using it for weight loss or type 2 diabetes reversal. And we quite often see in social media, like, don't go chasing ketones, chase results. And I'm like, well, yeah, but what is the person's why? Let's always look at the reason why they are doing it and then try to make the supposition as to whether or not. I mean, our goal in life is actually, for most people, not to actually use our product, which is like crazy for some of those big multinational companies. I mean, if you think for years, they had high priced ketone strips at $4 or $5. What effect could they have changed if they had lowered the cost and made it easier and helped promoting good low carb diets? But they didn't. They just sat back trying to take the cash, which that does bother me about big companies a little bit. But can
I talk about the cash for a second? Because when you were called, right, we came to you. I came to you. I said, I need a way with a low cost to monitor my patients remotely. And I want to monitor their blood sugar, right? When they do take a finger stick at home, I said, Dorian, can you help me? And granted, you have to understand, I've asked several other companies, right? And I just want people to know this because this is about integrity. No other company was so eager to work with us. I mean, some of them worked eventually with us. We did go to Abbott Logistics and get help and et cetera. But you guys were the quickest, most responsive. And, I when I first started.
And I think we did it for free, didn't we, Drew?
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, exactly. Probably, And so when that happened, I remember talking to my office manager. I'm like, we'll just buy like 100 or 200. Like, we're going exclusively because for us, we need a partner in our patient's care, somebody who's eager and shares a vision, not somebody who's trying to sell, an orange $100 breath meter, and sell you foods, right? So like that's not exactly what I'm looking for. So yeah, I mean, I was excited.
And I'll say the same. When I start out with my direct primary care, Keto Mojo reached out to me and they said, how can we help you? What do you need? Not saying, hey, here's how we do it. Here's how you have to do it. So many companies go, you have to do it our way. This is the only way that works. Like, what works with your patient flow? And I think that's really important. Like that personal touch of saying, and I appreciate that. I knew that, you've had your struggles starting up the business and all the craziness that you went through. And I'm going to pull up the episode, pretty soon to tell people which one to listen to hear your backstory. Cause I think that's really, really important. It says a lot about your integrity and what you're doing. But, you have a product that works. You could be the nicest guy on earth, and if it's not helping my patients, then I can't really support it, you know? And so the way that you were supporting, and then your website is fantastic, that, you know, people can go there and look at old lectures and get free education. There's a lot of free material that costs a lot of money. I know what it's like to do that. And so to have education to help people,
yeah,
you know, that's really something.
Paywalls was a really big thing for us. You know, I think you guys know when somebody has had metabolic damage, like when I went through my metabolic damage and I was 47 pounds heavier than I was, and I was on antidepressants, trying to fix that is really hard. Let's not just trying to break out from old habits is really hard. And I think inside every obese person is a real strong person that's trying to get out, but they are absolutely trapped. And, you know, I've personally walked that path, and I understand, you know, the effects of carbohydrates on mental health. But when we constantly see paywalls being put in front, how do we affect that change? You know, I was very blessed to meet Doug and Pam of Low Carb USA and now Society of Metabolic Health Practitioners. And we were, through our foundation, we were able to help the Society of Metabolic Health Practitioners. But by putting all of those Low Carb USA videos, all of those conferences, what we need is a way is to really affect change. We have to change more of you guys. We have to change more doctors. This is the challenge now. Like people, we see a lot of people who are going on ketogenic diets, and that's fantastic. But it now needs to be more doctor recommended. And what we want was a way of like saying, well, here's an endocrinologist who's presented at Low Carb USA. And then somebody could say to their endocrinologist, hey, take a look at this, or their nephrologist or their cardiologist, and say, look at that and tell me what's wrong here. But you guys as doctors need to get in front of your societies, your guilds, and start asking the questions to them and walk into the lion's den that is there. Because when we're at all of these keto conferences, which are absolutely fantastic, we're in the echo chamber, getting out from that. And that's why when we put this forward, we thought like, hey, how can we get to prevention? Why wasn't I not told this when I was a young lad? You know, how do I get there so I don't do that metabolic damage that I start earlier when it's really easy than later when it's so much harder? Yeah, like doing it in your 40s, oh my gosh. Doing it in 50s or 60s, we see the success rates drop off because people get stuck in their ways.
Well, I would argue with you on one point is it's not going to go to the standard medical practice for a long time. What you have to do is have direct primary care doctors who get it. They go, look, I got an hour to spend with my patient. We can talk about lifestyle. We can talk about the effects of stress and sleep and all these other things that we have time. If you have an 8-minute appointment, you're not going to be talking about ketones. So that's the reality is until the system changes. And the way the system changes is by putting pressure back on the standard medicine people that are in the model, you know, like now we're looking at data, 70% of doctors are working for a system. So they're not independent anymore. So we're looking at those other 30% who go, look, I want to be a doctor and I want to help my patient. That's what it's going to come down to. And when enough people say, wait a minute, I don't want to just be there for a major overhaul every time. I want to keep my oil good, right? Then you change the system, but then they start looking and saying, what are these guys doing that's different? How does Berta Clinic come along and crush all the other competition? So that's what's important, I think, is as we get more direct primary care like Tro and me and everyone else we're seeing, and people who are really, really invest in their health. A lot of people, they get free insurance from their employer and they don't really care about their health. They go, just give me another pill and I'll keep eating donuts.
But on that point, I think we talk about the free insurance and the healthcare. John Schoonby spoke at the Keto Live conference in Switzerland, which we were out supporting recently. And you've got to take a look at the margin spread. Insurance companies are not dumb. They want to take their premiums and they want to make that gap. They want to make that margin. Now, already, when I drive my car, I have software that tells me whether or not I'm driving. Am I tailgating? Am I late braking? Am I doing that? And because of that software, I can actually get cheaper insurance, or I can get penalized and have more expensive insurance. Now, it's a small leap. We've already seen that happen in different states in America on just driving your car. Now imagine that moment when that leap, when the insurance company suddenly realizes, and Virta Health, who you just mentioned, have already shown independently how many thousands of dollars can be saved by an insurance company on the medical costs. So the insurance companies, I will soon probably very look at seeing these margin spreads, because John Schoonry is with Swiss Re. He's the leading medical officer that is there. So Swiss Re are already seeing how low-carb diets can affect different, and he's speaking on it. And he's speaking to other insurance companies on it. And I think this is where we could potentially see the pivot. But the tip of the spear is the work that what Virta Health has done in showcasing in clinical trials. And when they spoke just recently at the American Diabetic Association scientific sessions, they showed their 5-year data. And then we saw the publication just come out with the ADA. I'm sure you both of you guys have seen it, where they finally said, yes, a very low carbohydrate diet is an effective tool, but they were still advocating for seed oils and stuff like that. They've got some ways to go, but it was a pivot. And I think that's once the insurance companies start to take note and they think of that margin, the margin that they could potentially make within the patient population. I think that is the propensity where we might start to see the tipping point. And once we see the tipping point on one disease state, then the applications for the others will come on in. But I think you're right. It's going to take a lot longer than what we thought it would take. I thought there was going to be a revolution when I started Keto Mojo, and we're going to change the world. And then you come to reality.
Can I just say you have? And I just want to talk to you. I don't think it's going to be the insurance companies. I think it's going to be two things. Certainly we see the grassroots element. I mean, you've inspired it. You're at every single conference, helping every single conference get off the floor. You're helping to create a community. You help the Society of Metabolic Health Practitioners, leveraging all the work from Adele Height and Doug and Pam. And now we have, 500 doctors and dietitians and nurses. I mean, this is the work that needs to be.
I didn't know there was 500 now. That's fantastic. Well done, guys. That's
really growing. There's 2,000 people on the website plus, and we're growing. And now here's the thing, not for profit. That's the most important point, is that this is a mission that is not profit driven, right? And but just to come back to your point, which was, we have to convince the insurers and the medical community. You know who's calling me now? And I'm sure they've called Brian. The self-insured corporations. It's the individuals who are like, please help me. I've seen it. I've seen you on social media. I've seen your studies, right? And the other people are the employers. And I can't get off the phone with them, right? Because they want more and more and more. And we have to build those doctors. We don't even have those doctors. And just to give you an example, we have a company that came to us. We've saved them more in 6 months than we've cost them. And guess what each one of those patients has? Every single patient got a CGM only for a couple of weeks. They don't use it long term. But guess what they're using long term? They're using a Keto Mojo. They're checking, when they check their blood sugar, me and Brian get that data. When they're checking their ketones, we're getting that data. And you had to build those systems, and people don't realize how valuable that system is. Because when people are ashamed, or when they feel like they've gone off, they don't want to reach out for help. You don't want to, when it comes to food, it's very emotional, like you said. But now we don't need them to reach out to us. We see what they see.
Yeah, tell people who don't know what My Mojo Health is, so that people
they know what
it is.
So it's a tiny little button right on the top left-hand side of our website. It just suddenly appeared, and people are like, what is that? And we've been quietly working on this for about 2 years. So it's a secure, HIPAA-compliant, triple encrypted health cloud, where a clinician or just a user can see their data in absolute real time, as you said. But we've been quietly developing it. I think our development costs are about 1.9 million so far in this software. It certainly hasn't been cheap. I'm like 5 times over my budget. But we're going to get to the top of the mountain, and we will do it. Whatever it takes.
When you say IT, when you say the words API, just multiply your budget by like 10.
Yes, I was so wrong on what it was when I first started, but I think a Harvard education would have been cheaper for me. But anyway, School of Hard Knocks. So what we want to do is make sure that it was of a caliber that could connect in to the leading hospital systems, Epic, Elation, Athena, Serbo, and we've already built those connections that is out. So to get those, it was really hard to build it, but that's working within a hospital network or a clinician network. But we also have it that it's standalone, that any practitioner can utilize it at any time, just in a standalone basis, and we're giving that away for free. And it gets even better. You don't even have to use My Meter, because anybody can input data manually. So there, we haven't like said, oh, let's keep it in within some kind of like paywall, but it's just for us. We're giving this tool away for free for clinicians and for doctors or coaches to utilize. And on the roadmap, and where it's in beta right now, is built into it will actually also be a communication tool. Where it's possible in real time for somebody to communicate from a doctor's office or a clinician's office directly to that individual. And we know that quite often you get asked the same questions time after time, or the same problems come on up. Now, I looked at our e-commerce system, and I looked at how our customer service people handle 7,000 tickets a month. 7,000 inquiries come on in a month, and I have 2 in my team. Well, 2.5 is the reality of it. And our average response time during working hours is under 7 minutes. And our average conclusion time is under 6 minutes. So how are we applying that methodology, and how can we apply that into a healthcare model so that we could do more with less clinicians like yourselves? And what I mean by that, there's 38 million people in America that have diabetes. If the average RD can only manage 135 patients at a time, and I don't know how many patients that you're having to deal with, Brian, at any one time, we would need 135, we would need an army of 900,000 metabolic practitioners. The conferences would have been huge. But we don't have that. So we need to deliver the tools of scale, remove the paywalls if we are going to affect metabolic change, not only here in the United States, but globally. And My Mojo Health is now in 8 languages. I've had a request from some friends in Greece, so we're going to add Greek into it. And I've got some people I'm talking to in Vietnam, so we might add Vietnamese. And I'm talking to people in Turkey. We're already in the Turkish language. So this is how I think that it will go on out. And we're going to see some, we're seeing it in so many countries. Keto Mojo is now in 36 countries, which makes struggle being in the multiple languages. But, you know, I do more in 1 month in America than I do in the rest of the world. So we have to affect America first on this one. And you know, through that, the rest will change.
I have to ask you, any thoughts about RPM? Any thoughts about just remote patient monitoring as a service? Any thoughts of getting a medical director, nurses, engagers? Like any thoughts on that model? Because
yes.
I thought we need that model.
So when we were at the 7th Annual Symposium for Ketogenic Therapies for Neurological Disorders in Brighton back in last October, we were blessed to hear one of Dr. Sarah Hallberg's last presentations before she passed away. And that was all about the continuous remote care model and what Virta were doing. And this was kind of like what guided us even more into how we can implement RPM within our My Mojo Health. And so what basically happens with that, they use a pod of doctors, clinicians and coaches working with a patient population. And through that pod, they can then scale up through it, which was in their paper, which is, if you look at search for Hallberg and continuous remote care, you can pick up the paper really easily. And so that's kind of like what My Mojo Health has morphed into, so that any clinician team can utilize it for free for a full remote patient monitoring. And yes, we are working towards adding our CGMs into that, even though for us, it doesn't make any fiscal sense for us to be able to do that. But we understand it's another tool that you guys need for the first starting off that you like to use. So we need to bring that in so that you can have the utilization on it.
Well, and the other thing along those lines is that for us, like the CGM has limitations, and the limitations, it could be inaccurate at times, right? Depending on higher or lower levels, or if you go in the shower, if you lay on the meter, whatever. So I'm using Keto Mojo I go double check it and make sure, and let's see where you're really at, so we know, and then we can kind of fudge the numbers a little bit and kind of figure out where you're running most of the time. Yeah. And then, because if it's off by 20 points, your A1C is going to be totally different than what you're expecting. So if I know what your finger stick is and I can get an accurate reading, that's another marker. That's why I really encourage my patients to have a Keto Mojo. And also, if you're dealing with diabetes and someone's going from the type 1, type 2 spectrum, and you want to make sure they don't go into ketoacidosis, you better be following the ketones pretty closely if you're concerned about that patient.
Yeah, I mean, we look at glucose measurement. The key for glucose measurement is deprescription. As you guys know, how quickly are you now deprescribing? If you get that really great patient who goes into keto for you really nice and easily, they get it, they work it, and they're a type 2 diabetic that was on X number of insulin points, how quickly are you deprescribing insulin and getting them off their medications?
I'll tell you right now, we do it before the day before our first visit.
You're doing it before, it's the day
before the first visit, the day before if they've come to us, right, we already got them a CGM, we already got them a Keto Mojo, and they've met with a health coach. Basically, we tell them we plan on you discontinuing your medications, just so you know, let us call your doctors if we need to. We always work with the medical team. On day 1, we give them a medical prescription, and we say, we will follow you in real time. We are meeting them every week, okay, for the next 2 months to verify that that's successful. We're not about to publish this because you can do it on day 0. You could probably do it on day -1 if the patient knows who they've selected us, right? We're the LowCarbMD docs, right? So they've selected us because they know what we can do. So it's not generalizable to whatever, the University of Minnesota, let's say, and their, epic population, right? But when they're coming to us, when they're selecting us, we've reviewed their chart, we're selecting them, my staffs communicate to them, health coaches communicate. The first minute I meet them, okay, we talked to you that you may come off your meds, now go ahead.
Yeah, and that is the key of a continuous remote care model. What a continuous remote care model through RPM can do. And this is where other doctors need to understand that the episodic method is not the best method if you're doing a metabolic intervention. That's fantastic to hear that. Well done.
And the other important part of that equation is that, SGLT2 inhibitors, they can be dangerous if you start a ketogenic diet and you're not monitoring the ketones. So you want to get them off that. So I'm stopping people all the time, and then for the first day or 2, they may bump up a little bit. The day 3, they're perfect. And they're like, why was I taking that medicine? Well, because you had to pee out the extra sugar you were eating. Now you're not eating that sugar anymore. It kind of makes sense, right? Yeah. So, and those drugs, I had a patient, I'm trying to think what her copay was, like $350 a month. Her copay was on this medicine. And she goes, you can't stop it. The doctor said I can never stop. Well, let's stop it and see what happens. Now she's been off it for 2 years now almost. That's a lot of money saved for the system.
Yes. That's where the margin spread comes, the money that will be saved. And I really hope that America's capitalistic society will follow the money. But also remember, on the flip side, there's a massive amount of money to be made in sick care rather than health care. And this is the big 800-pound gorilla that sits in the room.
Yeah, that's what we have to figure out. Because guess what? If you want to have more of a certain diagnosis, you pay the doctors more for that diagnosis code, and they'll figure out how to diagnose that, right? So all of a sudden they start checking everyone's pulses. Like, oh, your pulse is down a little bit. Okay, I get paid more for that. So that's the problem, is when you have there's a motivation for people to get sicker. And this is one of the conversations I had with one of the head of one of the HMOs in town when I left this system. I said, look, I'm saving you all this money every year and I'm getting penalized because I'm spending more time with each patient, but I don't get reimbursed for that. So I'm taking a net loss. And he said, well, you're actually hurting our income, because if the patient doesn't get those diagnosis codes, we don't get paid more by the government. And you go, uh-oh, the sicker the patient, the more you get reimbursed. Then where's my incentive to make someone healthier?
Right.
It's not there.
Yeah. And then what happens, the payments from the government is not enough. So then we come up against taxation issues, and then or we come up against premiums going up. I'd love to see our premiums come down. And that's why I look at it going like, will that day when we see what's happened in auto insurance happen in the day in medical healthcare? That could be the real kind of like difference. Well, we'll understand the big brother issue, and I'll leave that for the legal minds to figure out that. But
well, even if you look at it from just from a financial perspective for the patient, I've had so many intro. I know you've seen a lot too. They come to me and their A1C is 6.4. So they don't have the diagnosis of diabetes, but they have diabetes, right? But they don't get that diagnosis code. But if they reverse that and bring it back down, they never get diagnosed with diabetes. Guess what? You go to 6.5. Now, all of a sudden, when you go for life insurance, it's going to cost you more. You know, health insurance is going to cost you more. Everything goes up because you're diabetic, and they know that diabetic's going to cost the system. So if you can say, hey, look, I don't want to cross that barrier, even though it's an imaginary marker, really, we know that. But if you can prevent it, like we see how many times we prevent it, and people don't realize when they go to get life insurance 5 years from now, how much money we saved them over their lifetime, just from that one move, just from keeping that one number below, 0.2 below it or 0.1 below it, that it saves you a ton of money down the road.
Yeah, but 6, really? I mean, we should be shooting for 5.
Oh, we'll bring it down, but I'm just saying.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, if you go, oh, okay, I'll wait till I get diabetes, then I'll treat it. It's like, that's too late for you for the rest of your life. You're going to be stigmatized.
Yeah, but you guys know how much damage is being done, even with a 6. I mean, that's terrible if you think of what's happening just at a 6. And they're saying that the cutoff point is 6.5 when we really want to be under 5.
Well, the reality is we should be checking the insulin and knowing where you're at. That's going to tell us a lot more information. That's why people ask me daily, well, what's a good insulin? It depends where your 3-month sugar average is and your sugars are. Because if your insulin's really low and your sugar's really high, that's really bad. And if your sugars are normal, but your insulin's 58, you're in trouble. So, it's kind of looking at the big picture, and that's what we get paid to do. We look at the big picture and go, how do we prevent damage down the road? Because we have to look at the big picture. We can't just focus on one little thing. We have to look at the big picture.
And that was for us, was how do we empower doctors like yourself? How do we bring the tools that other people were not bringing in to play? And how do we use the fact that America has been the wealth? Our goal was always, how do we use the wealth of America to affect change to a greater population, not only here in America, but and it's like, I look at it right now that keto is a little bit sliced white bread, if you will. Terrible there, but it's very affluent to a lot of people, and we need to be able to lower those costs to make it affordable through different fiscal stratas of the population. We deal with food deserts. I was working with some guys at Let's Truck, and a lot of these truckers, they are ex-Army. They got their commercial driver's license in the Army. They are now getting their type 2 diabetes diagnosis, and they go from having a 5-year physical down to a 1 year, down to a 6 months. And if they can't turn it around, they lose their livelihood. They lose everything that they've ever learned. And what are they supposed to do? And they go from one food desert to another food desert and across America, delivering our goods. And now they suddenly realize, hey, I could lose my license. I could lose my livelihood. And especially if they own their own truck. Can you imagine what happens to those people? Same thing happening to pilots. And this is where we have to try and change that. There is already a shortage of truckers. Now imagine that you've got, what percentage of the population in America has diabetes and pre-diabetes? Well, are we up to 20%, or is it still 16s?
So diabetes is 20%. The adult population, pre-diabetes and diabetes alone, approaches 50%.
And it's probably higher than that. It's higher than that for checking insulin levels.
Imagine almost 50% of our truckers potentially losing our license when we already have a shortage of truckers in America. These are the fundamental things that are causing the cracks in the veneer. And to me, when you start looking at it, it's just like, whoa, guys, how are we going to afford this? Non-communicable diseases are supposed to be like $30 trillion by 2030, 8 years from now globally. That's freaking scary.
Yeah, and a lot of those truckers they're independent, so they don't have health insurance a lot of times, and they can't afford the fancy medicines other people get. So that's why you start realizing, okay, what do we do to fix that problem? Can they prepare their own food? Can they carry with them on the truck? Do they have a refrigerator on the truck? All those kind of things. They're the backbone of America, our farmers and our truckers. And so, yeah, when we're facing these things and you lose your license and you have no livelihood, then these are productive citizens that no longer can be productive.
Right. And so that to us is why our MyMojo Health continuous remote care platform is so important, that we really feel that this will be the next frontier, and to empower not only the user, but also the doctor at the same time. With a low cost intervention, because if we're removing all of those barriers, all the fiscal barriers, and it just becomes the food that person eats and the nutrient density, actually the cost of a low carb diet is actually a huge amount more cheaper than anything else that is out there, because nothing is good as healthy feels.
Yeah, I think, I think you're right. We even in our app, we've started to think about, how do we give people resources to quote unquote, get keto on the cheap, how to do this within a budget, how to do it in a, if you don't have time. It needs to be convenient. It needs to be easy. It needs to accommodate the person's food tastes, preferences, cultures. And that just takes know-how. And it takes also on top of that, I think, moving beyond, which is what you focused on, moving beyond episodic care.
Yes.
Right? And doing exactly what you've talked about.
And Sarah Hallberg mentions that in her paper. There are like, I think there's like 5 sections in a diagram that she shows. One is the tracking through a system of continuous remote care working with the doctors. So now that's the second part, is the doctors and the clinicians. Then the third part there is the resources that are available to that individual. And the other piece that it was there is community, is utilizing community like Facebook groups or WhatsApp groups where people who are going through this process go through it together, and that support community comes through. And within that community, there are moderators or docents, if you will, that have been have gone through even a course themselves, that can then help the others. So if you've actually, the best patient or the most informed patient is the one who's already gone through it, and that person can also help others who are going through it, and those coping strategies, which relieves the clinician and the doctor from dealing with the minutia. You guys shouldn't have me dealing with the minutia, which is the really easy aspect of try this recipe, do that part, or like, oh no, don't go and have the egg bites from Starbucks because they have rice flour in them. Mr. Keto guy, was like, oh, egg bites, I ate those. And I'm like, test my ketones. I'm like, what's going on here? And I was like, looked at the recipe on egg bites. And I was like, rice
now
flour.
You tell me, man. I knew it. I knew it wasn't right. Dang it. I'm going to talk to my wife about that.
Yeah, so those are the little tricks that the community can help each other out with. And you're so right. These are the elements that when they come together, that's how it works, and that's how we get more success. I mean, Virta's, I think, 5-year study was like a 74% success compliance rate. And Jessica Ernst, who's our clinical educator at Keto Mojo, she was 10 years plus at Cincinnati's Children's Hospital doing pediatric epilepsy. She was getting between a 35 to a 45% compliance rate. So when she looked at that model, and we did a poster at Metabolic Health Summit on it, which was like, look at this method. This is, if we can apply this, we could win on 74% of cases, which is a massive win. And that small percentage you don't, they're still pretty low carb-ish, and they will still have a better outcome than doing nothing at all and keeping as we continue doing it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that these are so key, because we cannot, I think the reality is that it is behavior as much as it is medicine, as much as it is stress and mental health, right? The support, real-time support. You started this conversation by talking about a car, right? You started this conversation by talking about a car, right? And people's physical health, as it relate in their medical health, as it relates to their relationship with food, right? They're not prepared. They don't have a spare tire. They don't have a jack. They don't have a, lug bolt nut, whatever they call it. I'm not a car guy, but you know what I'm saying, right? And they have AAA. They have OnStar. You press a button if you're in help. It can be tracked remotely now. They're all connected with satellites, right? So the thing is that our cars, the people that care for our cars, right? The people that have built systems for our cars, they've done a better job than for medicine, right? And they've done a better job than for behavioral health. Because the best we have is Weight Watchers, and that's pathetic. And if you go to, the medical, we need a medical, low carb. And I've been telling this, we need a bunch of low carb churches, basically. I know I've told Brian this for a long time. And we need apps. We need doctors to start working together. Thankfully, we have a doc that's crazy enough to come work with me. Hopefully we'll add a couple more doctors in the coming years. We got to get doctors start working together so that we can create a system, like you said, like a car, like our car.
Yeah. And Dorian, for people who are listening, like practitioners out there now saying, hey, that sounds like something I'm interested in. How do they get in touch with you? What do they do to get the ball rolling?
Just very simply, go to My Mojo Health, click on the top button. You will be able to create a practitioner account, or go to our practitioner section, click on that, and they will put you in contact with our clinical educator. We'll spend one-to-one time with that doctor, go through absolutely everything so they can understand it. We ask them what their protocol is, and that's Jessica Ernst's role, is to be that assistant along with Genevieve and Rita within the team. We work one-to-one, because when we change one doctor, we change their patient population, and that's pretty big. I'd like to come back to Dr. Cho when you mentioned two things: behavior and mental health. We've seen what Rita's done in the work in type 2 diabetes, but right now, behavioral change, what we're seeing in nutrient psychology, I think the psychologists are more geared to that continuous remote care model, because it's checked back every week, than what even some MDs are. And what we're now seeing in mental health through the work with the Bazooki Foundation, Gemma and I, through our Ketogenic Foundation, we're very pleased that we did a matching grant with the Bazooki Foundation to set up the first brick and mortar training school in the European Union. And the mental health, we just had the mental health experts with Dr. Georgia Eid, Dr. Ignacio Caranta, Dr. Adrian Sotomoto. And, we were working with them. I think we're going to see the next revolution happen in metabolic care through mental health with we're working on a clinical trial with Dr. Ian Campbell at the University of Edinburgh. And we have a few other mental health trials. And what the Bazooki Foundation have done for the first time, they've invested more in clinical trials in this last year than the last 60 years of mental health. And it is all around that metabolic approach to mental health, which I think is going to be absolutely astounding.
Yeah, nutritional psychology is the next frontier. We certainly saw Georgia Eid's new paper, along with some other prominent researchers, showing even inpatient that these things have an impact. And, we know it. Ketones work for seizures, migraines. Me and Brian talked about this 4 or 5 years ago. We see, implications on addiction before Volkow's study from the NIH, right? This is, hey, we're seeing things, mood stabilizing, and it's great to see it in the literature. I think this is going to be huge for mental health. And huge for, besides diabetes, what are the two biggest things that plague our patients, Brian? Diabetes, mental health, right?
Zero doubt. Anxiety, stress, depression, all these things. And when we saw it happening, and we called it out. Episode number 13, right? And doctors from around the country, around the world, were saying you guys should have your license revoked for talking about this. And have you got any apologies, Tro? I haven't heard any.
Nobody.
But I've had a heck of a lot of patients come in and say, you know what? I'm not depressed every day now. I'm smiling. I'm playing with my kids. I'm going to meet my neighbors. We're seeing it. And so when you see that, it's like, hey, losing 50 pounds is cool, but being able to smile and enjoy life, that's That's why we went into medicine, to be able to help people to have a better quality of life. So, you know, how we all work together to do this and accomplish it.
My N=1 was I came off antidepressants, and you know, I'm generally between 1.1 and 1.7 on my ketones, and that's where I have the best joie de vivre. When I heard Dr. Ian Campbell, who was bipolar, had tried to commit suicide, talk about when it felt to him that the lights came on, like the grid was powering up in his brain, and now he's the leading researcher. I mean, he had lost his job, he'd lost his money, he was losing his wife and his family, and suddenly he turns his entire life around and becomes one of the leading researchers in bipolar, where he's focusing on what was his personal experience, but is looking at the actual science behind it. This is what excites us the most, because it can make a profound difference to society. I didn't realize that depending on the type of bipolar that somebody had, the suicide rate is anywhere between 15 to 25%. Wow.
Insane.
That's a pretty big death rate.
Yeah.
That's pretty big. And so, and what about the loss of the value to society? Those brains, those intellects of those people who their wiring wasn't set up and they needed to make a difference in their lives. What about that intellect that we lost to society when they left us? I mean, for me, that's kind of like, wow, that's the saddening piece. But yet there is that glimmer of hope. And that hope's really important.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely. And I think, you know, I'm so honored to work with a company like Keto Mojo. Got to be honest, I've dealt with so many, you know, having this telemedicine practice, we've had so many partners come and go, and that bond is strengthened. And it's very clear we have very, you know, similar commitments. And I'm just, you know, it's good to be able to call you a friend.
Well, I'm so stoked to be over to see you in New York in September. I am so looking forward to the Keto Symposium. Dude, it's like, it's been years. I mean, we used to live on the Upper West Side. Gemma lived in 18 years in New York City. So we're going to be going back to our old place and meeting up with old friends and new friends. So yeah.
Take you out for a steak, or are we going to have enough time to do that? Hopefully you'll let me take you out for a steak.
Totally. And, you know, but having it at the Lincoln Center there, we know that very well on the Upper West Side. It's really easy to get to on the subway line on that one there. So it's like a great location, great spot to be in. And I'm looking forward to it. And you've got a great lineup for that. I mean, Nina Teicholz is in. Who else? The highlights.
This is actually a big thing, you know, because it's all from the work. You know, we had her on the podcast, Christina Hess, right? And she's really headed this up. She's put it together. It's a labor of love. You know, it's called Keto Symposium. Get your tickets now. It's going to be really good. There's a lot of speakers there, including yourself. And I heard they're letting this bozo go there. You'll get to meet my wife, you know, so, you know, be careful. She's got really tasty keto goods so that she's going to push on you. So be careful. You got it.
And don't forget about San Diego. We have a little thing going on down here end of August too. That's going to be a lot of fun. And Dorian, you're going to be there too. And so, yeah, I think there's so much. And again, you know, seeing what you do behind the scenes, and for everyone listening too, there's this other little podcast called Life's Best Medicine, episode number 19. We have the Keto Mojo people on. And I think it's worthwhile hearing their backstory and knowing why Tro and I are saying this. We have no financial involvement in what they're doing, but we know the potential, and we're not worried about competition. We're in a sick population. We have to all do what we can. It's just like scratching the surface. You know, we have to have more metabolic health practitioners out there. And, you know, the hope for me is I just got contacted. You know, there's 10 residents at a local residency program in medicine that are interested in metabolic health. I think people are starting to see it. You know, we've talked to the students at Harvard Medical School, you know, on metabolic health. Nick Norwitz is doing great stuff over there. So, you know, when you start seeing that people are getting it, and once you're so brainwashed, you can't step back and see it somehow. It's like, it's so strange to me. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. You know, once you see what's happening, you say, gosh, dang it, I'm seeing people come off insulin. I've never seen that before. it's exciting, it's fun, and tapering meds and mood meds and all that stuff. It's just really remarkable.
And then when you look at the different disease states now, where the science is emerging, that is sort of like almost to the point of unequivocal, the use of ketogenic diets for type 1s, because type 1s can get type 2s for pumping too much insulin coming on in them.
We have a case just like that. Somebody was type 2, developed autoantibodies to insulin, and now is type 1. I mean, it's rare, but it happened. It happens. And that's the Keto Mojo was so critical for her, for this patient, so critical for her.
And on the flip side of that, when I was in the Keto Live conference in Switzerland, there was a case brought forward where a child was developing type 1 diabetes, went on a paleo ketogenic diet. It was a PKD. So there's different stratas. Let's just be very clear. There are different stratas of ketogenic diets designed for different uses, depending whatever. And on that type 1, they were able to arrest the decline and reverse it.
Yeah, and PKD is a really high-fat ketogenic diet.
Right. And Dr. Ian Lake, who is a type 1 doctor in the United States, was kind of like, why didn't I know this when I was tried? Why is it that this was not prescribed as like the first intervention as to what you do when you see a child developing type 1? That should have been done, except no, they just wanted, like, you can eat the carbs that you want and we'll just go and pump you full of insulin to try and mask what the underlying root cause was. It's fascinating. And we look at the different disease states through multiple sclerosis and Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, neurological that we've talked about, schizophrenia and bipolar and ADHD and depression and anxiety as adjuvants for cancers. We're seeing it in polycystic kidney disease, PCOS as well, for helping women to conceive. As you guys know, in cardiology, through type 2 diabetes reversal, type 1. I mean, at what stage? How much more evidence do you actually need? And this is my part of us getting in front of you guys as doctors, trying to like stick the stick into the hornet's cage of these societies and kind of like stirring it up a little bit.
We made this, you know what? You helped make it. Your work, your generosity, the work of Pam and the work of Doug Reynolds, and building off of what Adele did, the late Adele, who's just a behemoth in the space. We were able to make this, society, so we don't need to mess with the ADA. We don't need to mess with, rail against the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, right? Well, now we have a common language, right? We have a common language. We have a common set of, education, which includes Nutrition Network, which I know you guys work very closely with, which includes Diet Doctor and Low Carb USA and several others. And the idea here is we need to get clinicians thinking at metabolic health, and you guys have been so integral and such a pleasure to work with. I wish, if you're in industry and you need a mentor, call these guys, call this couple up, call this couple up. And we're not pro-industry, right? We're like anti-industry, me and Brian, right? But in this case, we're pro-industry. And I have zero financial interest, in fact, I think I pay you, if I'm not mistaken, I pay you. We buy stuff from you, So there's no financial interest behind my statements.
Thank you. So all I can say is thank you. Gemma and I sat down, we've been married for 26 years. We don't have children. And the question was, what is our legacy going to be in life? And that we made a buck or we made a difference. And I'm honored, I get to walk around and talk with PhDs and MDs. And here's a kid who got kicked out of school when he was 17 and a half. And to be able to give back to society, I think it's one of the greatest gifts that you can be given.
Yeah, and I say go listen to their story, because I remember when Gemma was saying, you come in and go, okay, we spend all of our money on this thing, and then this happens, and they're like, okay, we're gonna do a second mortgage. And you're like, oh my gosh, when do you quit at some point? That the courage it has that you had. I mean, that's inspiring to say, you know, hey, we're gonna keep fighting this. I see the vision, you know. So Life's Best Medicine, episode number 19, go back and listen to that, because you know that takes a lot of courage. And then what you're doing now, having some success, working your tail off. I see you at all the conference. You don't send other people, you're there doing it, meeting people, talking and figuring it out. And that's what we have to have. You can't just have this impersonalized medicine where you sit in your office and you never see patients and you kind of just text back and forth. You gotta really be invested. And so that's what we've done. And that's what, like, I see what Tro's doing and what I'm doing is like a hybrid of you know, medicine and what Berta's doing, because I want to put my stethoscope on the patient. I want to like laugh with them, and I want to give them a hug when they're killing it, you know, and encourage them when they're down. All those things that we do, you know, that's what the medicine is really. And it's sometimes it's just that, you know, you can't just say, and I know people have that opinion. You go, just do a ketogenic diet and everything's great. Well, there's a lot more to the, it's not that simple. It's not that simple. Trust me on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm in 100% agreement. You know, we hear a lot of the oncology and the cancer docs talk, and especially when they go into the deep dive into the genetics and the genetic SNPs. And some people are not predisposed for a ketogenic diet. There are some people where too much protein is going to be an issue for them because they haven't got the right genetic SNP that is there. And I'm glad you said that, because it's, you know, it's not the silver bullet, but it's one part of the tools that is available that a person can affect their change. And you try and utilize all the tools in your arsenal to affect the greatest amount of change. And the most important is you guys.
That's funny. You know, I think it's you guys, right? We need
we all love each other.
No. I'll tell you why. We need industry partners who share a vision of health, of asynchronous medical care, of remote monitoring, right? We need those, right? And there aren't many. And the ones that are there are pretty terrible, right? And so we need you, you know, and you've helped make people like us, right? By by donating through the foundation, donating to the Society of Metabolic Health Practitioners, you know, and that's, this is work. This is the real work. Sorry.
And what's the future?
Am I fanboying out here? Am I fanboying too much?
Yeah, yeah. And what's your future? What do you see? Where do you see it going for Keto Mojo and My Mojo Health?
We actually have 3 after the solidifying the My Mojo Health platform, which should happen in, you know, right now we have what we call MVP, and then there's some nice bells and whistles, some nice haves that we're adding on to that. We're pretty similar, but then we have 3 other items that we're working on in the pipeline. Some are advanced technology that we are evaluating. This is very much in bench lab stage, but the bench lab stage, it looks very promising. So trying to bring that to market will be a challenge. That's called Project Leapfrog. And then we have 2 other projects that we are working on that we think could also have value. So, you know, there's kind of like I'm very cryptic because I'm under NDAs and all sorts of other things. But there's a kind of like a watch this space kind of like thing. But it all comes down to about lowering the cost of testing, being able to get to a broader audience, making sure you've got consistency, repeatability, accuracy, and reliability, and taking away as many challenges as possible to affect metabolic change, and to be able to do that on a global scale.
I mean, I got to be honest with you, for long term, after the acute phase, we are universally using Keto Mojo, both the glucose and ketone meters. It's been so valuable for us. So already the cost benefit works for patients. It works for us. I'm excited to see what happens next. I got to be honest.
Yeah, and I'll just add in something about the company and about you. Is when I was doing helping some people that were underserved in a Hispanic community. You know, everyone said it couldn't be done. We crushed it with them. And
did you? Because you asked us to go to that, and it was a fruit farm.
Yeah. Well, it's a nut. They do nut in
fruit and nuts.
Buckettville.
And I was looking at half of the stuff that we're doing is like, don't eat fruit, guys. And they're
well, and that's the funny thing is that's what was laughing is it was Cinco de Mayo, the first that meeting we had, and I'm like, I don't know how this is gonna go over. I'm talking to you guys about fruit and nuts and all this stuff, and on Cinco de Mayo, I'm telling you not to eat tortillas and cultural foods, but it went over great. But the point is that you all said, hey, we'll go out and help them. We'll check their ketones. We'll show them how to do it. We'll get their sugars read. And like and I said up front, this is not going to be a financial market for you. These are not people that can afford it. What you're doing is like, we'll drop off meters, we'll drop off strips, we'll do what we have to do. And then, Ben Bickman, who I have a lot of respect for, said, hey, I'll send it. I go, look, this isn't a business move. You're going to you're just taking a loss. You're just helping out. And they go, we want to help. Like those are the people we want to lift up. And that's why we do the podcast. People like you that you say, hey, I'm in it. Let me help them. Like, it doesn't cost me that much to do it. I'll drive up. And Gemma was like, I'll drive up and do it. That'll be fun. Let's see what happens. And, once they got it, they crushed it. They did better than most people do. I would put it that way.
I'm so glad to hear that. That's fantastic news. Well done.
Yeah. Reverse diabetes. We saw it all, man. Mood stuff getting better. And, it's just amazing to see. And then they got it. They go, I get it. I could do this long term. This isn't just, the other thing that you both brought up is, when people say it's non-sustainable, it's like, really? That's not what we're seeing.
Yeah.
We haven't seen people non-sustainable.
I mean, I've been keto since 2015, and even in countries where I cannot speak the language or have difficulty, we've still been able to manage it. But what is so great, what you've achieved with that PIP is, here's a Hispanic group, and now they are learning it and they are changing it with their families. All the flavor, the carnitas tacos is all in is in the meat and then the onions and the nice hot sauces, and having the guac and then having the creme fraiche on there, sour cream. That's where the flavor is. It's not in the tortilla in the base. That's just a disposable plate.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, exactly. And when they saw that, that's what happened when they saw it. When they could see the numbers, they could see their sugars, their ketones, everything getting better. They're feeling better. Their joints don't hurt. It was education. Once someone's educated, they went back. I mean, one of the ladies, when we were doing Zoom, she was in Mexico helping her family, teaching them, like saying, hey, I'm not eating that anymore. I'm eating this way. And here's what we're doing. And her family started doing. Her mom comes up. I've never met her. So that's the community aspect of when people say, oh, I get it. Let me go help someone else who's struggling. That's the awesome part about it. It's not us. Ultimately, it's not us. It's when you get the little evangelists, like Tro says, all these little churches, when people say, hey, I'm starting my own keto group. I'm going to start low carb for my diabetic patients or whatever it is, or friends and neighbors. And it's amazing. I have an 86-year-old who's converted her whole neighborhood and her grandson and it's incredible. Like once they get the education, they get excited that they feel better. They want to help others.
And that cultural impact, that tip of the spear that you guys have, that then becomes profound change. That's
the most inspiring thing is the families. It's not like the patients. Sometimes you kind of expect we can help them, but I got to be honest with you. When our patients go on and become the advocates for their family's health, and they kind of draw them along. I had a patient very recently. She lost a ton of weight. She's done so well. And her diabetes is reversed for the first time in 15 years. And her husband's diabetes is reversed. Husband's not even a patient. Husband's not even a patient. And we were so concerned. We just checked his A1C just to make sure his blood sugar wasn't too low, even though he's not a patient. But that it spreads. It's spreading.
Yeah. And on that, we were at an epilepsy conference, and a psychologist was talking that when a child has childhood epilepsy, the greatest chance of success is based when the entire family does it together. They actually get, I think it was something crazy statistic, like 60 to 80% more chance of success when the whole family works together. That family unit, that community unit cannot be understated. It's huge difference, because then that young child does not feel special or different. They're all together, they work as a unit, and the whole family benefits. It's incredible.
Absolutely. Keep up the good work.
Well, thank you, guys.
And Tro, keto seems to be keeping your personality disorder in pretty good check for the most part.
I don't think anything can keep my personality in check.
Good seeing you, man.
Not even keto can help me.
I couldn't resist, man. I tried. Just keto can help the whole time.
Listen, you guys are both inspiring. Thank you so much. Dorian, thank you so much. Please send my regards to Gemma. Brian, it's always a pleasure. Send my regards to the family. Guys, thank you for all the listeners and the people who've donated to help make this happen. And just thank you for supporting all of us. We're trying to make lives healthier and more meaningful.